Welcome to Retirement Rescue Radio, a show specifically designed to help retirees and pre-retirees maximize their financial efficiency so you can live the retirement lifestyle you've always imagined. Your host is Nate Miller, investment advisor representative and author of the CPR Retirement Rescue Roadmap. Nate discusses thoughts and ideas from some of today's most knowledgeable professionals in the field of finance. He offers strategies along the way to help you make better financial decisions so you can maximize your retirement. This is Retirement Rescue Radio.
Hey everybody, Nate Miller here with another episode of Retirement Rescue Radio, and we've got a very good one today. Today I'm talking with Richard Eisenberg. Richard started his career in finance as a writer at Money back in 1978. And so he has literally been writing about personal finance for as long as I've been alive, actually 2 years longer than I've been alive. And so he recently left his post as a senior web editor of the Money and Security and the Work and Purpose channels for Next Avenue. However, in what he calls his, quote, unretirement, he has started writing a column for Marketwatch and also started as a co-host of the Friends Talk Money podcast, which is a personal finance for people over 50 podcast. So this is going to be his unretirement lifestyle. While some financial writers want to help people get rich and then just continue to get richer, Richard has decided to focus his career instead on helping others manage their money better and make smarter, common sense decisions about their finances. In a world where there's so much more information than we really need to have, right? Financial products and opinions, more of those than ever before. Richard has a wealth of knowledge and a proven track record at sifting through a lot of that data, the noise, to help provide sound and relatable financial advice that anybody can consume. And in this conversation, Richard and I are going to discuss how to make sense of some of the tremendous amount of financial information and articles that are out there today, the 5 keys of success to a semi-retired or unretirement lifestyle, and just to help you discover new meaning and purpose in this next phase of life. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Richard Eisenberg. All right, Retirement Rescue Radio listeners, we've got a very special episode today. We've got Richard Eisenberg with us. Richard, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for taking some time here. And before we get started, are you ready to help rescue some retirements?
I am.
Great. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff. Obviously, we just had an intro that had a lot of the accolades about you, how long you've been writing in the financial industry, but there could be some stuff out there that's unique about you or interesting about you that you can't necessarily find online. So if you want to help my listeners make you a little bit more human, what would something like that be? What could be interesting and unique that might not be readily available online?
Well, I'll tell you a few things, I guess. One is I started my career as a fact checker at Money Magazine. It was a job I got right out of college. It was at a time that they had never hired anybody out of college before, so people kept waiting for me to finish my internship and go back to school. And I said, no, this is actually where I'm going to be working for a while. Mm-hmm. And I ended up staying there for 19 years, but doing lots of different jobs over the years.
Okay. Well, fact checker, I feel like that job could be a full-time job again today, because I think we've got so much information out there that's just not true. We need someone like you fact checking all of it.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, there aren't that many people left doing it because there's been so many budget cuts in journalism. But there are a few places that do it, and it's a very important skill. And I would, when I worked at Next Avenue and I was editing stories there, we insisted that our writers be their own fact checkers so that we didn't run into accuracy issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what's interesting about you is, a lot of our listeners have probably read some of the articles that you've put out throughout the decades. You've literally been writing longer than I've been alive. Not very much longer. What was it? 1978, I believe, when you started?
That's when I started my career. Yeah, I started as a fact checker. Then I became a writer at Money Magazine. Then I was a Washington correspondent, senior editor, and ultimately the executive editor. And then I've done similar but different work at lots of other places after that.
Okay, awesome. Well, so this will be great. And so what is it like, right now you've been writing for decades and you don't like to call it retired. You like to call it unretired at this point. Sorry, go ahead.
Me.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, that's my own definition. As of January of this year, I tell people that I'm unretired. Some people use the word semi-retired. I
Mm,
don't say retired because people have an image in their mind of what that means. And it's usually an image that was sort of based in the 1950s. People still think retirement means doing nothing except maybe playing golf or tennis
mhm.
or maybe swimming or pickleball. And that's about it. And I don't think that's what retirement means for a lot of people. And it certainly isn't what it means for me.
Yeah. I know it seems like I've got a lot of guests on here that don't like the word retirement or especially retire. That means you're withdrawing from something, or maybe you're going to sleep, or, and all of those have pretty negative connotations, really. And so, originally, obviously, you've been writing on this now for decades, but what got you interested originally to start writing on finance?
Well, it was really more a question of sort of where could I get work when I started looking for jobs after graduating from journalism school at Northwestern back in 1978. The economy was not that great. There weren't that many jobs in journalism. I wanted to work at a magazine in New York City. And I sent my resume out to lots of places. This was before LinkedIn or lots of other things. And what I found was I'd gone for an interview at People magazine, which I thought is where I wanted to work. And they didn't have any jobs for me, but they said, well, I know the person in charge of fact checking and research at Money Magazine. Would you like to talk to them? And I said, sure. And I did. And they were looking for somebody, and I was eager to do it. I'd interned the summer before at Forbes, so I'd had a little background in financial journalism. Well, of course, that wasn't personal finance. But I was, ready to learn, and I felt like I could use my skills in journalism to basically, become an authority over time. And it would take a while to do it. And I would learn from people who knew more than me, who were either the writers of the articles or the sources of the articles. And so I started doing that. And then I just found how much I enjoyed it and how much I liked the idea of helping people manage their finances, especially people who were middle class. Or lower middle class or lower income. I felt like the upper income people, the wealthiest people, probably could afford to hire financial advisors, but a lot of other people couldn't. And they were looking for guidance. And this was actually an interesting time because it was just when we started to see the development of things that we now take for granted. It was really the beginning of the explosion of mutual funds. It was the beginning almost of 401k plans. Banks were starting to sell certificates of deposit and things like the All Savers certificate and the IRA, individual retirement accounts. These are all brand new for people. And so everybody needed to learn, but particularly people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, I think really were looking for guidance for that and wanted some help to prepare for retirement. And then over the years, as I grew older, and the audience that I was writing for grew older, I started tailoring my writing and editing more towards people in their 50s and 60s, which is what I did at Next Avenue in particular, and what I'm doing now for Marketwatch to help people plan for retirement and also to manage their money in retirement.
Okay. So you instead of helping the rich, quote, get richer with new information and stuff, you took more of the approach of let's help the average Joe figure some things out. Is that because like growing up, maybe that wasn't a place or that education wasn't available to you?
It was partly because it wasn't really available to me, but mostly because I felt like it wasn't available to most Americans. I had a really great education at Northwestern, but there were not any classes about personal finances there. And in fact, after I graduated, I met with the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences because I felt there should be classes like that. And he said, well, that's not what institutions like ours do. If people want to learn that information, they can get that somewhere else. But, that we teach liberal arts and we don't do that. And I disagree. I really feel like all colleges should be at least offering classes in personal finance so that when the students graduate, they have some idea of what the world is going to mean for them financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I would take that a step further because, not everybody gets a good education or, where do we all learn how to deal with money first? From our parents, usually, and if our parents were really bad at it, we probably need to be untrained on certain things and retrained on the right way to look at money. And so, yeah, those courses could probably help a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think in many cases, particularly people today who are in their 50s and 60s, money was often a taboo subject in their families. And so often their parents didn't really tell them much about personal finance, even though they could. They kept it private. They didn't want to talk about their income or their debts. So as much as the people today could have learned from their parents, I think they often didn't learn. I think that's changing now, but it was not true, I think, for people who are now in their 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Okay. Now, so you've been writing about personal finance literally for decades here. And I want to talk a little bit about how there's a lot of information out there, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it just, completely wrong. I can't tell you the number of times where we may have had a client or a prospective client in here and we're having a conversation and they'll tell us something that they learned about something online. And I'm thinking to myself, that is completely wrong, And so what are your thoughts about running into that, or just like all the misinformation out there, and how would someone even know whether or not they're reading something that could technically be wrong?
Well, that is a big problem, but I don't think it's only a problem for personal finance. It certainly is a problem in personal finance, but it's also true in lots of other parts of our lives, whether it's politics or science or anything. It's so easy for anybody to publish whatever they want to online, that it's easy for people to learn things that are not accurate and not know that. My advice for people is to work with reputable sources that already that you trust, whether it's the major media outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or websites like Marketwatch or Next Avenue, or financial advisors like yourself. It's not hard to know whether the person who's giving you the information has a good background on what they're talking about. A lot of people just don't bother to do their research to see who's saying it. And so they see somebody says something, they assume it must be true because they heard it or read it somewhere. And unfortunately, that's often not true.
Yeah. And in the, since I started, I'd say I've had a few different spots in the financial industry. I've been in the tax side of things. I've been on the banking side of things, financial advising. I even consulted financial advisors all across the country for a number of years. And so I want to talk a little bit. I don't know if this was on the questions that I sent over there, but the term annuity, right? We see that one in the news a lot. And I feel like it's one of the most miswritten tools out there, because we find a lot of stuff out there that's negative, but there's a lot of stuff that's positive too. And so how would somebody looking up information about that tool know whether or not what they're reading is maybe biased by whoever is writing it, pro or con, pro or negative of the annuity? How would they even know?
Well, you look at the source of the material, you see who's writing it, and you can easily see what else that person has said or written before, and find out. You'd probably want to start at a objective place that maybe just a sort of a financial dictionary like Investopedia, that's basically going to say, or Wikipedia, that's going to essentially say, this is what it means, and then maybe go to some of the financial firms that can explain it. But you want to be careful. You're not going to somebody who's in the business of selling it, because they are going to want to tell you only, what's great about it and not give you the full story. By the same token, you don't want to go to a place that is only about why annuities are terrible and nobody should buy them. I think, they're a complicated financial subject. They're not right for everybody. They are right for some people. More and more employers are offering them as an option in their 401k plans. That wasn't true a few years ago. I think if people were to understand that the idea of an annuity is pretty similar to what they get from Social Security, which is it's often steady monthly income for a long period of time, but exactly how they're packaged is very different. And there are, as annuities that are connected to the stock market, and then others that aren't, and some that have, pretty high fees, and some that are very hard to get out of, and others that aren't. So it's wrong and difficult to generalize about annuities because they're just so different from each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I think on the low end, maybe 4 different types, but you can have an argument for 5, 6, 7 different types when you start adding QLACs and other stuff in there. So unfortunately, the articles very, very rarely that I've seen will ever differentiate on what type of specific annuity they're talking about. And I think what I used to do when I would look at anything, whether it was positive, negative, any type of financial tool, is first off, I would look to find out who wrote it. And then I would look up information on that person to find out how they were licensed. Because if they were only licensed to offer that and not the thing they were talking bad about, well, then I kind of knew that we call that following the money. At least that's what my dad called it, is following the money. So yeah, I think that's a really good understanding the source of who wrote it and maybe the thought process of why they did. All right. And so now you've got your the first book that you wrote way back in 1987 called How to Avoid a Midlife Crisis. So, and you talk a lot about
midlife financial crisis.
Midlife financial crisis. Exactly. So what's the difference between a midlife financial crisis and just a regular midlife crisis?
Well, a midlife crisis is what people think about when they think about people in their 40s or so, feeling like they're sort of at wit's end, or sort of not sure what to do, what the future holds. They're a little unhappy. And so they think they're going to get the answer to that by buying something like a red convertible or a new house or an expensive vacation, and that's going to take them out of their midlife crisis. And often it doesn't, or maybe it does very temporarily. But a midlife financial crisis is more serious. I wrote that book because I thought this was at the time that baby boomers were just starting to turn 40, and a lot of them had not saved any or very much money for retirement. And so they were seeing themselves having a midlife financial crisis because they were really worried, rightly so, whether they would have enough money for the rest of their lives, and whether they'd have the money that they would need to, help pay for the kids' college education if they had children, or to buy a house, or to retire the way they wanted to, when they wanted to. And so I was trying to help give them some guidance so they could avoid finding themselves in that position, or if they were in that position, try to find ways to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so that midlife crisis, do you find that happening later and later as we have more and more life expectancy?
Well, I guess it all depends on where you define midlife. It used to be that the average age was late 70s or 80s. Midlife meant 40, give or take. Now that a lot of people are living into their late 80s and 90s and sometimes hundreds, you can make the case that midlife is more closer to 50 than it is 40. I guess I don't get tied up so much in the actual year so much as that rough time period. So I think we're really talking about 40s and 50s by and large, as the time that people think of as being midlife.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you have probably been, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you were in the financial industry or written about the financial industry for decades now, you're probably a pretty good saver, correct?
A good what? I'm sorry?
A good saver. You saved money.
Saver, yeah. I would say I've been a very good disciplined saver over the years. Looking back, I wish I would have saved more each year than I did. I think a lot of people feel that way, but I certainly understood the importance of doing it regularly. And I've been, putting money into a 401k since 401k started. I started saving for college for my kids as soon as they were born. So yeah, I would say I'm serious about saving.
Okay. So did you ever feel like you ever had enough saved up? Like, did you ever get to a point where yeah, I feel good. I'm not worried about retirement now or unretirement now. I think I've got enough. Have you ever hit that, or is it still always just, I think I might need more?
I feel like none of us is ever sure if we're going to have enough, because we don't know what the future is going to hold. Which of us is going to need long-term care? That's a huge expense that often is not covered by Medicare. Very few people own long-term care insurance policies. So, I feel like I've saved a good amount. I met with my financial advisor, and my wife and I did, to see whether it was a good idea for me to start my retirement now, and my wife similarly. So we felt like we were in pretty good position to do it. But I think, we always wonder, well, if we had more savings, would we be able to sleep better at night? And I think probably we would.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's interesting. So you have written so much and done so much research around the financial industry, but you also still felt like you wanted to use a financial advisor. So talk about maybe the conversations that you had with your wife as you were deciding to do that, and then how that whole process came about.
Well, I think everybody can use a second opinion and advice from a professional, whether it's about your money or it's about your health, your taxes. So I said to my wife a few years ago, I really think it'd be useful for us to meet with a financial planner to talk about, how are we doing? Are we where we should be? Are there things we should be doing differently? Are there some tax strategies we should be thinking about? Are there retirement ideas we should be doing? Is our portfolio broken down in the right way? I felt we were doing pretty well and doing a lot of the right things, but I want to hear somebody else tell me and see if we were wrong or missing some things. And I think it's been very helpful for us to meet with them and explain what our goals were and why we did what we did, and have them make suggestions. And they have made suggestions that we've taken, not always, but often, about either where to invest our money, or when to take money out, or when to take pensions and Social Security, things like that. So I feel it's really useful to speak to somebody who does this for a living, who's taken a lot of education to know more about the ins and outs of some of these things than either of us do. And I feel like I have a good starting knowledge, but I feel like we can always learn more.
Yeah. Okay. And so help my listeners out by talking about your, retirement, your journey here. How did you decide when and how to retire from Next Avenue? And I think you've already mentioned it's not really retirement right now. You're still writing, you're still doing things at this point. But, I think it was the guy's name, Bruce Feiler, was it? Bruce Feiler. He mentioned like 3 different phases of transitioning into retirement.
Yes, that's right.
The long goodbye, the messy middle, and the new beginning. So where would you say you're at right now?
I think I'm probably in the long goodbye, and I'm hoping to avoid the messy middle, or at least much of the messy middle.
Mm-hmm.
The long goodbye is really sort of figuring out, before you take the plunge to retire, when and how are you going to do it, and what are you going to tell people, and how will you explain what you're doing, so that people sort of understand what you do. I find, even today, when I'm calling somebody up to schedule an interview for an article I'm going to be writing, I freelance now for Next Avenue, and I write a column called The View from Unretirement for Marketwatch. Mm-hmm. And I'll email somebody that I want to interview. And if it's somebody who I've talked to over the years, they'll often say, I thought you were retired, as though because I retired from my Next Avenue job, mm-hmm. I've retired from life and I wouldn't be interested in this subject anymore. But I explained to them, I haven't retired from life. I just retired from that particular job. I did this when I did it because I turned 65. I'd been at Next Avenue 10 years. I was part of the launch team. I felt it was a good time to let somebody else have a shot at being the managing editor for the site and being the editor of the Money Channel and the Work Channel. I thought they might bring some fresh ideas and perspectives that I hadn't had. But I also wanted to give myself the opportunity to try some things that I wanted to do that I hadn't had the time to do, that I couldn't do when I had a full-time job every day, all day. And so that means some mentoring, some volunteering, some traveling, writing for more than one place. And part of that was meeting with our financial advisor and saying, well, this is what I think I'd like to do and when, and did it seem to make sense? And once I got their blessing, I thought it was okay to do. And I spoke to my employer at Next Avenue back in November, saying it's what I want to do starting of January this year, because I wanted to give them enough time to find somebody to replace me. And I didn't want to leave them in the lurch. And I wanted them to know that I'd like to keep writing for them if they would have me. And I was glad and fortunate to say that they did want me to, and I've continued to do so. Okay, well, great.
So that was the long goodbye. What would the messy middle be for a lot of people?
Well, that's the part of retirement where you've been doing it for a few years and you're kind of figuring things out, and you get some unpleasant surprises. They could be financial, they could be health, they could be personal. And you're just sort of dealing with those transitional issues that you've got to address, and figure things out. And, most of us don't have a lot of guidance about how to retire, and how to spend our time and how busy to be. And so we're figuring it out. And so that's, I think, why Bruce calls it the messy part, because, it's not like adolescence or other parts of life where there's sort of a built-in training system. There really isn't one for retirement. We're all sort of on our own.
Okay. So then have there been any of those surprises for you?
Well, I would say, I've only been at it since January, so it's a little early for too many surprises, but I would say the challenge has been the schedule, figuring out say no to, because I've been lucky that some people have come to me with projects to do, things to write or edit, and I've said yes to some but no to others, and I had to figure out which ones I could and should say no to. And I look at my calendar that I've created, and it used to be that I was completely busy all day, every day, and I knew what I had to get done, and then there were meetings that were scheduled. Now my schedule is my own, and I have to figure out, how do I feel about days where there's nothing on the calendar? And I don't like any of those days, so I try to fill those days up, but I don't want to overdo it. My wife sometimes asks whether I'm really retired or not, so I think this is something I'm still figuring it out.
So do you have like a criteria of what you use when you determine whether you do a project or an article or something for someone, or you decide to say no? Any decision making prior or principles that you go through?
Well, I kind of take the Marie Kondo approach. Marie Kondo is the home organizer who says, throw away things that don't give you joy. Well, I try to do the same thing when it comes to my work. I want to take on assignments, writing, editing, that I'm going to enjoy doing, and turn down ones that I don't think I'm going to enjoy doing. And that could be because the subject matter doesn't interest me that much, or it seems like it's going to be a slog, or it's going to be working with people I don't think I'm going to enjoy working with. When you're an employee, you have to work for the people who are your bosses. And when you're an independent contractor, you can pretty much decide which people you will and won't work with. And as you know, and all of your audience knows, some people are great to work with and others are not.
Yep, that is true. All right. And so have you had to say no to a lot of things?
I've said no to some things. I don't know that I'd say a lot, but a few. And when I do say no, I usually try to recommend somebody else for it if I know somebody else who might be good for it, because I want to be helpful. And so if there's a job that I don't think I'm interested in doing, or I'm not quite right for, if I know somebody else who I think might be interested or would be right, I'll tell them about that person and let them connect if they want to. And if I just feel like it's just not right for me, I'll just say, thank you so much for asking, but I think I need to say no to this.
Okay. And so with all of the writing that you've done over these decades, there's a lot of individuals that you've probably either met or become acquainted with. Who would you say has been the most influential of all of the people that you like? Who stands out the most of all of them that you may have met along your journey?
See, it's hard to narrow it down because I've
2 or 3.
I've had an opportunity to talk to lots of people over the years. But a couple that come to mind for different reasons. There's a fellow named Ken Dychtwald, Dychtwald, and he runs a company called Age Wave. And I met him first when I worked at Money Magazine back in the 1970s and 80s, when he was just starting out. And he is really an authority on aging, longevity, baby boomers. And he's done some very interesting research, often with financial services firms like Bank of America and Edward Jones, where they will survey people, primarily people either in retirement or near retirement, about their finances and how they're feeling and what matters to them and mistakes they've made and regrets they've made and things they want to do. And I always learn things when I talk to him and I see the research that he's done. And And so he's very impressive. Another fellow who comes to mind is a man named Paul Irving. He had been until recently the person who ran the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging. And so he's very thoughtful about aging. He wrote a very good book called The Upside of Aging. So they're excellent. And then there are, researchers who are very knowledgeable about things that relate to personal finances and retirement. People like Alicia Monell and Catherine Collinson with Transamerica. These are people who are very knowledgeable about retirement planning and finance. There's another woman named Cindy Hounsell, Hounsell. She started and runs a group called WISER, WISER. It's the Women's Institute for Secure Retirement. And she's all about helping women prepare for retirement and think through the issues of retirement, and particularly in ways that women either have more challenges than men do or have more interest than men do. So those are a few that come to mind.
Okay. Yeah, we've got some dealing with David Bach, and who wrote the Smart Women Finish Rich and that whole seminar series there as well. So we've done a few of those women only centered events because we noticed that actually a large portion of my clientele are either divorced or single women. So we realized, well, if that happens to be a vast majority of our clientele, we should probably talk to them, because they do have, in my opinion, they have some different and unique needs in retirement that men don't have. For one, they live longer than us on most times, so their money has to last longer. So
yeah, and in some cases they've taken time out of the workforce to do caregiving, and so that's meant that they've had fewer years to save for retirement. It means the amount that we get from Social Security is going to be less than it would have been otherwise. There are also a lot of women in their 50s and 60s and 70s whose husbands managed the money for the two of them, did all the investing, and for whatever reason didn't share a lot of that information with the women. And if they get divorced or widowed, they're now learning for the first time a lot of new things that they need to understand very quickly about investing and insurance and taxes. So often they're very eager to learn. I also found that in general, women tend to be more honest about what they don't know and eager to learn. A lot of men I find to be overly confident and pretend to know more than they really do, and a little more boastful about how smart they are when it comes to money. And I feel like a lot of men. Well, it's not true for them all, but I'd say it's true for a lot. I feel a lot of men could probably be a little more honest about what they still need to learn.
Definitely. Okay. And so you obviously, we're talking a little bit about this. You understand the importance of having your spouse involved with the process. And we could probably have a whole separate podcast where we just talk about, the difference between men's needs and women's needs in retirement. And I want to have them involved in everything that we do, whether if you're part of a couple, I want to make sure that we're meeting with both of them. And most of the time there's one that loves spreadsheets, ones that hate spreadsheets, so then they end up getting together. But even if somebody doesn't like talking about the finances, I feel like that they need to have input on what they want to do in retirement. And those funds are going to be able to, fund that lifestyle that they want. So they should have a say in whatever they do, whether it's the guy or the girl that hates talking about it. They should at least have a say in what's going on. So that way they know some semblance of the plan, at least how they're going to be able to do the things that they want to do in retirement.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. And by the same token, it's really important for the financial advisor to be speaking to both spouses or both partners. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. There are cases where there'll be a husband and a wife in a room, and the planner will talk only to the husband and ask questions only to the husband, and the wife is sitting there as though she's not even in the room at all. And I feel like it's really important for advisors to be treating both people equally.
Oh, definitely. Okay. So, as we get older, we sometimes wish we had more of a sense of purpose. So how do you define purpose, and what does purpose really mean for you?
Well, I think that as people get older, especially once they get into their 50s and 60s, a lot of us are looking for more meaning and purpose in our lives. And we're looking for ways that we feel like we are making a difference, and that be in our community, it could be in the world, it could mean life lessons for our children, leaving a legacy to them. And I'm not talking about necessarily a financial legacy, although it could be, but it could be just sort of principles, letting our children know what's important to us and what we hope is going to be important to them. So, for me, finding meaning and purpose has been partly about mentoring students. I'm doing that right now with a program at NYU in New York City, where I'm helping to run a program during the summer about that. But it's also volunteering. I now try every Saturday or Sunday when I can to volunteer at a place near where I live in New Jersey called Furniture Assist. And this is a place that helps people who want to donate possessions from their homes, furniture and other things, to Furniture Assist. And then people who really need them, who are brought there by social services agencies, come and take what they need for homes because they don't have the money to afford to buy kitchen tables or dressers or desks or things like that. So that's where I'm finding meaning and purpose, but it's different for everybody. Some people find it through their work. Some people find it outside of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you and your wife with your current advisor right now, do you guys have any strategy going forward on when you get together with the advisor, or maybe what might necessitate a meeting with the advisor? Do you have any ongoing strategies?
Well, we have quarterly meetings with our advisor. We know that every quarter we're going to have an updated meeting where they're going to look over our portfolio and what's been happening with it. They're going to ask us some questions about what's going on in our lives, and we may ask some questions from them about things we're thinking about or wondering about. And then if there's a life event, one of us is leaving a job or about to take a pension or Social Security or starting on Medicare, we'll have meetings about that sort of thing. So we know we'll meet quarterly, but there are also times where I'll say, I'd like to schedule a meeting to ask you about something. It might be about taxes, or it could be about, relocating or whatever it might be. And then there'll be times where they'll say they'd like to meet with us because of what's been going on in the markets or a new tax law, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And so look at the timeline. It was January. You said you've been, unretired here basically for about 6 months, correct? So right at the high of the market. And then we've had what we've had these past 6 months. How have those conversations gone with your advisor?
Well, my wife and I are very much long-term investors, and our financial planners view that way too. I mean, we're not oblivious to what's going on. We know what's happening in the market and what it's meant for our portfolio, but we also know that we've had many, many, many good years in the stock market that we've been lucky to be able to participate in, and we expect that's going to happen in the future. So when we had our meeting with our advisor recently, we talked about that the size of our retirement savings is less than it was in January, but why we're not panicking and why we're not making radical changes in it. We did sell a mutual fund and bought another one because that one had lost money, and we thought from a tax standpoint it would make sense to take the tax loss, but we were not dramatically moving our money around. We're not getting out of the stock market. Now that interest rates are going up, we're trying to take advantage of that as much as we can with our savings. And so putting some money into longer term treasuries than just in money market accounts, because now you actually get paid for that in a way that we didn't 6 months ago.
Okay. So you're keeping a level head.
Trying.
Yeah. Good. Okay. And do you feel like he has helped? Like, did you feel like maybe a little bit of anxiety coming up, and then maybe he was able to help bring it back down? Or have you just been able, since you've been in the industry for so long, you kind of know how it goes, so your head was just level the whole time?
Well, it's easy to be emotional when the market's going crazy and going down a lot. We tried to stay rational about it as much as we can, but there's no question we've been concerned, and we'd let them know that, and they listened to us, and they told us why we shouldn't be particularly worried about it. If anything, they thought maybe this is a time we might want to put more money or a higher percentage of our portfolio into the stock market because there are bargains now. And they're probably right rationally, but it's a hard thing to do when you see stocks going down to get in. But that's the difference between, great investors and bad ones, is the great ones, have the stomach to do that.
Yeah, stocks are just on a 22% sale right now, apparently. It's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any, and obviously this would be a great time to even plug your own book, but any books that you would recommend if someone was wanting to learn about personal finance?
Well, I'll mention a few that I've read recently, because I'm writing these days a lot about retirement. And I want to be helpful for people who are getting close to that age or in that age and are looking for some guidance. One book is just called Retiring ? The authors are Bruce Hyland, Hiland, and Ted Kaufman, Kaufman. And their book is not so much about the financial side about planning for retirement, though that's part of it, but it's much more about the rest of planning for retirement. And it's about finding meaning and purpose, but it's also about figuring out how you'll spend your days and volunteering and the importance of social relationships and avoiding loneliness and depression and things like that. And these are guys who are I would say they're now in their 70s and 80s, and they would tell you that they've retired a few times because they weren't successful at it the first time. But I like their writing style, and I think it's a very helpful book. There's another book that was written by a financial planner that came out fairly recently that I really recommend to people. It's called Retirement Stepping Stones, and the author is a fellow named Tony Hixon, Hixon. And the book had an interesting and sad genesis, but it's a very helpful book. Tony's mother had been a hospice nurse for many years and loved doing that, found great meaning and purpose in doing that, and then retired, but hadn't really thought about what retirement was going to be or how she would spend her time. And that got her very depressed, and she spiraled to the point of serious depression and ultimately taking her own life because she felt she didn't have any purpose anymore. And Tony wanted to write a book to help people avoid that happening to them. And so this book, Retirement Stepping Stones, is all about thinking about the importance of meaning and purpose before you retire, and where are you going to get that, and how can you get that so that when you are retired, you do have something to look forward to wake up to every morning. And he has now started including a life coach as one of the advisors in his firm when he meets with his clients. So they're mostly meeting about personal finances, but they're also meeting about life. And I think that's a pretty smart attitude, and I'd like to see more advisors do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an area that's just not talked about enough, Okay. And so what would you say, and this might be a difficult one to answer, so maybe you can have like a few, but I was going to ask the best piece of financial advice that you have ever received throughout your life.
Well, from a financial standpoint, I guess the best advice would be to save as early as you can, start saving as early as you can, and then continue saving and save regularly and discipline yourself, and not to think that because you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s and you hadn't started or you hadn't done very much, that it's too late. It's never too late. In fact, that the tax law encourages people over 50 to put more money away because they can get what are called catch-up contributions in their 401k plans and some other retirement plans that allows them to put in more money each year than when they're under 50, if they have the money to do so. I think it's especially important for self-employed people to discipline themselves to save for retirement. It's much easier when you work for an employer that offers a 401k and all you have to do is sign up once and it's automatically done for you every paycheck. But when you're self-employed, there's nobody saying to you, here's how to do it automatically. You've got to make it happen on your own. And I feel like I'm mostly concerned about self-employed people, both in their 40s and 50s and 60s, but also in their 20s and 30s, not putting enough away for the future. The best advice I'd say I've heard from just a work and career standpoint is to raise your hand and volunteer to do things that are above and beyond what's expected from you at work, because it may help you get to the next job, the next level. It'll show your boss that you're eager. It might mean a bigger pay increase for you. And it may just make your job more interesting too.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely something that I've seen even in my own practice here is a lot of self-employed people have so much wrapped up into the business that they haven't gotten much, if any, in some cases, savings outside of it. And unfortunately, they don't have the every 2-week paycheck to where money can just automatically go into a 401k and they don't even have to think about it. They now have to make it a decision every single time, where I think you've noticed that saving becomes a lot easier if it's made automatic to where you don't have to make the decision every time, make the decision once and it just happens automatically. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I'd also say it's never too late to start learning more about personal finances and investing. There are some people who feel like they missed the boat. They didn't start learning about it when they were younger, and now it's too late, but it really isn't. There's a lot of very good information in the library, on the internet, if you're careful about what you're reading, that can really be helpful. There are some very smart people who have produced a lot of really helpful advice. And I would say, if you feel like there's an area that you don't really understand or you don't know much about, whether it's about investing or insurance or about taxes, to take the effort to learn about it, because it's not that hard to get the information. The hardest part is making yourself do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, then what would you say is one of your habits that you have that has contributed to your success and journey of being able to write for finance for literally decades?
Well, as a writer, I would say probably my habits are being diligent and organized. I'm able to multitask in a way where I can have a bunch of stories going on at the same time in my head and on my desk, and keep them all going. A bunch of the jobs I've had over the years, one of my jobs was to be in charge of the schedule for everybody else and keeping the trains running on time. And I feel like, that's something I've been able to do. I know how to do that, and it's been helpful for me, but it's been helpful for the people I work with. And so I'd say that's probably been maybe the best skill that I've had is sort of time management and being diligent.
Okay. Well, I want to take that another step, because having a podcast, I've had several of my clients that have asked me, how do you come up with all the content that you have? And so my question to you would be, you've been writing for decades. Did you ever have writer's block? Did you ever find it hard to come up with content to write about? And then if so, how did you then get past that?
I wouldn't say I've had trouble coming up with ideas about what to write about. In fact, I think that's something that comes pretty easily to me, and it's partly because I read a lot, whether it's books and newsletters or social media. I'm really trying to keep apprised of what's going on, and the more I read, the more ideas I have about things I want to write about or things I want to edit articles about. But do I ever have writer's block? Absolutely. I mean, anybody who writes at all, there are going to be times where the words come slowly, and you just need, to give yourself the time and space. And sometimes it means, walking away from your desk for a bit and taking a walk and thinking it out, or making notes to yourself, or talking to some more people, and then just sort of pushing yourself. Sometimes articles take longer for me to write than I expect them to. Every now and then shorter, but that's not that common.
Okay. So then I've got a question I always like to ask here, since we're, coming up close to our time here. So I appreciate the willingness to come on and share. If we were to fast forward the clock here a little bit, so let's go out 20 years from now. If you were to look back, what would you like to be considered absolutely absurd, or look back and say, man, I can't believe that we used to do X, whatever that might be?
What do I think now? Well, I'm
something that's going on now, right? But 20 years from now, it's basically done, okay, right? And we're looking back, going, man, I can't believe we used to do that, or that used to be a thing in our society. What could that
Yeah.
be? It could be finance related. It doesn't have to be. It could be anything related.
Mhm. Well, you know, I would say with every passing day, there are things that we're now able to do technologically that we couldn't do a month or a year ago. And so much of us, I think, spend so much of our waking hours at work doing things manually, such as, keeping track of things, and also true for our budgets, that increasingly become easy to do automatically. And so I feel like 20 years from now, there's going to be a lot of things that we're now doing manually, whether that's, keeping track of our budget or our finances, that are going to be done for us. I mean, there are now, robo advisors that some people are using to manage their money. Now, I have some issues with them because I feel like they only understand one small part of a person's personal finances. But for some people who are not interested in spending the time it takes to invest wisely and would prefer it be done for them automatically, it can be a helpful way for some people to manage their investments. So that's something that 20 years ago was not even an option for people. I now think it could be for some people. I worry that some people are doing it and assume that the robo-advisor has taken care of everything, and I think that often it's not. So there are some drawbacks to technology that people don't necessarily understand.
Again, another full podcast episode we can go into there. Okay. So is there any other, like a parting piece of advice or maybe any guidance that you would like to leave with any of our listeners?
I guess I would say for those who are not yet retired but are getting close, to spend as much time as you can to really think it through. If you've got a spouse or partner, talk it out with them. If you've got financial advisors, talk it out with them. You want to be as prepared as you possibly can. You can't be entirely prepared. There are always going to be surprises, but too many people, I think, unfortunately, don't really give it much thought. And then one day just stop working and then look at themselves and say, now what? And they then tend to get very anxious and depressed and can't sleep at night. And I feel like the ones who've actually thought it through a little bit more and spent maybe a few years planning it out are the ones who are going to be the happiest later on. So I would say, if you're not yet retired, think it through, talk to people who can be helpful for you. And if you are retired and you're struggling with it, don't feel bad, but see if you can get some guidance from other people who can do it. It could be from you read people who are retired or have been who can talk about it, or meet with advisors who can help you. There are now retirement coaches who can be very useful. I think it's a lot easier to get assistance than it used to be, but a lot of people don't bother to do it. And I think if they did, they'd be probably happier and more content.
Definitely. All right. Well, then, Richard, what's the best way for people to reach out to you or get connected with you or just find all of your information?
There are a few ways. You can read what I write on Marketwatch in the column I write called The View from Unretirement. And you can just do a search for my name, Richard Eisenberg, and you'll find my articles there. You can find the articles I've written on Next Avenue the same way. I've written a lot for them over the 10 years. I'm on LinkedIn, of course. I'm on Twitter, so you can find me there. And I'd be happy if you connected with me on LinkedIn, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, and I'd be happy to follow your audience as well. I'm on Facebook too, although I tend to use that more for personal than for professional things. So lots of different ways you can track me down.
Okay. We'll make sure to link to all those in the show notes then as well.
Thank you.
And okay.
I guess one other thing I should mention is I do a podcast called Friends Talk Money, which we record and we release that every couple of weeks. I did that with Pam Kruger and Terry Savage. It's about personal finance for people over 50. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts, but we try to be helpful for audio listeners, and we cover everything from retirement planning to taxes to debt to unretirement. So I hope people will listen to that and find it useful too.
Yeah. So personal finance for people over 50, huh?
That's right.
That's only 99% of my clientele right there. So
maybe they'll find it helpful. I hope so.
Definitely. Well, Richard, appreciate you taking the time. I think this is going to help a lot of people, have a better retirement or unretirement in this case, or at least make that transition a little bit easier for them so that they don't get into, my office and sit there telling me what they want to do in retirement. And one spouse looks at the other one and goes, I didn't know you wanted to do that. Because that happens.
It happens a lot. Yeah, sadly, but it does.
It does.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nate. I really enjoyed talking with you.
You bet. And have a great day.